when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called Dan Bongino a Trump propagandist and a grifter who exploits workers. She thought her Instagram followers would turn it into another viral moment of her destroying conservatives. She thought her performative outrage would work like it always did. Great for clips, perfect for fundraising, excellent for the brand. She forgot one thing: Dan Bongino was a real cop from Queens who'd spent years on actual streets protecting actual people, not a bartender-turned-politician who'd spent 2 years slinging drinks before building a socialist brand on Instagram. What happened next became the most satisfying political destruction of the year. For 35 minutes, the former NYPD officer and Secret Service agent systematically exposed every luxury, every hypocrisy, every betrayal of the champagne socialist who claimed to represent working people while living like an influencer. When he finished, AOC's carefully crafted image lay in ruins, and 3 workers from her own district stood as witnesses to her fraud. The House Committee on Economic Policy hearing room that late October morning carried the electric tension of something personal about to explode. The official topic was economic recovery and inflation solutions, bureaucratic language that disguised what everyone knew. This really was progressives interrogating a conservative podcast host about whether he was qualified to testify on economics. Dan Bongino sat at the witness table with the relaxed posture of someone who'd spent years in situations far more stressful than congressional hearings. At 50, the former NYPD officer and Secret Service agent carried himself with that particular combination of street-smart confidence and federal agent discipline that no amount of political theater could rattle. He wore a simple suit, not expensive, not cheap, just professional. The suit of someone who'd actually worked for a living before building a business. 3 seats down from the committee chairman sat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the contrast was immediately visible. At 35, the progressive congresswoman had perfected the art of performing politics for the Instagram age. Every outfit was carefully chosen, photographed, analyzed. Every gesture was calculated for the clip that would go viral within minutes. Today's look was serious legislator, blazer statement jewelry hair styled perfectly for the dozens of cameras in the room. Inside AOC's mind, political instincts honed through thousands of social media posts were firing on all cylinders. This was perfect. Conservative podcast host testifying about economics. Her followers would eat this up. Time to perform. Time to go viral. Time to add another AOC destroys conservative video to the collection. She'd done her research. Dan Bongino, former cop, former Secret Service, now conservative podcast host and commentator. Made millions, according to reports. Defended Trump constantly. Perfect target. And his testimony today about how progressive economic policies hurt workers. Please. She was the working class. She'd show him what real representation looked like. What AOC didn't know, what her Instagram-trained political instincts couldn't process, was that Dan Bongino had spent years dealing with people who talked big but crumbled under facts. On NYPD, he'd interviewed hundreds of suspects who performed innocence until evidence appeared. In Secret Service, he'd assessed thousands of potential threats who relied on bluster over substance. This was just that, with better lighting and more cameras. Bongino's opening testimony lasted 10 minutes. He spoke about inflation hitting working families hardest, about small businesses crushed by regulations, about energy policies that sounded good but killed real jobs. He referenced his own background, grew up working class in Queens. Father was a plumber. Became a cop because that's what working class kids did. Built a business from nothing after leaving federal service. knew what real risk looked like, what real work meant. Professional, measured, no flash. Just a guy who'd actually lived the working-class life progressives claimed to champion. Chairman recognized AOC for questions, and the temperature in the room immediately shifted. Progressive staffers leaned forward eagerly. This was what they'd come for. Conservative side braced themselves. Media rose, fingers hovered over keyboards, ready to capture every second. AOC's voice, when she began, carried that signature tone of moral indignation she'd perfected over 3 years in Congress. Not quite shouting, but definitely performing outrage for the cameras positioned perfectly to capture her best angles. Mr. Bongino, not even witness or any courtesy title, just dismissive. You call yourself an economics expert, is that right? Bongino's response came calm and direct. I have an economics degree from Queen's College and 30 years of real-world experience. So yes, I understand economics. A podcast host, she said it like an accusation, who peddles conspiracy theories to millions of followers, who makes his living attacking people like me who actually fight for working families. Her hand gestures were emphatic now, every movement calculated for the viral clip. You're not an expert, Mr. Bongino. You're a Trump propagandist, a right-wing media personality who found a business model attack progressives, rile up the base, sell them supplements and gold. The progressive side of the gallery started applauding. This was the AOC they'd come to see. The fierce defender of the working class, unafraid to call out conservative grifters. Bongino hadn't even looked up from the notes he was taking. Just kept writing steadily that cops' discipline of documenting everything, staying calm under pressure. He'd faced actual danger protecting presidents. A performative politician wasn't even on his threat radar. And let's be honest about what you are. AOC's voice rose, building to her crescendo. You're a grifter. You found a market angry conservatives who want to hear that progressives are destroying America. You exploit their fears, make millions in the process, and call it representing workers. She paused for effect, looked directly at the cameras. Well, I actually represent workers, Mr. Bongino. Real people in the Bronx and Queens who are struggling, not podcast subscribers, not gold buyers, real working people. Her final accusation came with pointing finger and that Instagram-perfect expression of righteous fury. So forgive me if I don't take economic advice from a wealthy conservative who's never actually helped a worker in his life, unlike those of us who actually do the work. The progressive gallery erupted in applause. AOC sat back, arms crossed, that satisfied expression of someone who'd just delivered the perfect soundbite. Her staff was already typing tweets, drafted Instagram post, ready, AOC exposes Trump propagandist's grift. She'd crushed him. Another viral moment, another clip for the collection. Another Dan Bongino looked up from his notes. The movement was slow, deliberate. Not angry, not defensive, just done being patient. His expression carried something that made AOC's triumphant smile falter slightly, the look of a street cop who'd seen through bullshit for decades and was about to call it out. Congresswoman. His voice still calm, but something underneath. You want to discuss working-class credentials. You want to talk about who actually represents workers. You want to compare backgrounds. He reached for a folder beside him, not frantically, methodically. The way a prosecutor reaches for evidence he's been waiting to present. Let's do that. Let's talk about who's really the grifter here, who's really exploiting workers for a brand, who's really making money off performing caring while real people suffer. The folder opened. Inside documents, photos, evidence. All the hypocrisy AOC had built her brand on, about to be exposed by a cop who knew exactly how to present a case. Because, Congresswoman, I grew up in Queens. Real Queens. Not the Instagram version. AOC's face, which had been flushed with performative triumph, suddenly went a shade paler. Because that folder, those documents, and the calm fury in a former federal agent's voice. This wasn't going to be another viral moment of her destroying a conservative. This was about to become something very different. Dan Bongino stood, and the room immediately sensed the shift in dynamic. For 20 minutes, had been performing gestures for cameras, voice modulated for viral clips, every word calculated for Twitter. Now she was facing someone who'd spent decades not performing, but executing. Not talking about work, but doing it. His voice, when he continued, carried that unmistakable Queen's accent that no amount of media training had polished away. Street smart, direct, real. You questioned my working-class credentials, Congresswoman. Said I don't understand workers. So let me tell you about my background before we discuss yours. He didn't need notes for this part. This was his life. I grew up in Glendale, Queens. My father was a plumber. My mother stayed home, raised me and my brother. We lived paycheck to paycheck. I know what it's like when Dad comes home worried about bills. When Mom's stretching grocery money. When vacation means visiting relatives because you can't afford anything else. The room had gone completely silent. This wasn't performance. This was just truth. I became an NYPD officer because that's what working-class kids from Queens did if they wanted to serve and support a family. Spent years on actual streets. Not Twitter streets. Actual New York streets, where real crime happens and real people need protection. His voice carried weight that came from experience, not rehearsal. Worked my way to Secret Service. 16 years protecting presidents. Didn't matter if they were Democrat or Republican. Obama, Trump. Did my job with integrity. That's what working-class people do. We work regardless of politics. Bongino pulled out the first document from his folder. After federal service, I built a business from zero. No political connections, no donors, just risk and work. Failed, rebuilt, succeeded. That's the working-class way. We don't quit. He looked directly at AOC. So yes, Congresswoman, I understand workers, because I am one. Always was, always will be. Now let's discuss your working-class credentials. The shift in the room was palpable. AOC's confident posture had stiffened slightly. Her staff stopped typing. This wasn't going according to script. Bongino pulled out a photograph. Large. Color. Unmistakable. AOC at the Met Gala. September 13th, 2021. The Met Gala. His voice remained level, which somehow made it more devastating. Entry ticket $35,000. Your custom dress with "Tax the Rich" painted on it. Several thousand more. He held the photo up so cameras could see. AOC in flowing white gown posing on red carpet surrounded by celebrities and elite. The image that had defined hypocrisy for millions of Americans. While you claim to represent working-class people in the Bronx and Queens, you attended one of the most elite events in America. An event that costs more than many of your constituents make in a year. Inside AOC's mind, panic was starting to edge through the political confidence. The Met Gala had always been her Achilles heel. She'd tried explaining it away hundreds of times. Borrowed dress, making a statement, bringing the message to the elite. But here in a congressional hearing with a working-class cop holding the photo, all those explanations sounded exactly like what they were excuses. And you didn't go quietly, did you? Bongino continued, prosecutorial precision showing through. You posed for cameras, for Instagram, made sure everyone saw you at this elite event. Because this wasn't about making a statement. This was about the brand, about AOC TM attending the Met Gala, about performance. He pulled out another document. Your apartment in D.C., luxury building in Navy Yard, one of the most expensive neighborhoods. How much is your rent, Congresswoman? More than the Amazon warehouse workers in your district could afford. AOC tried to interrupt. That's personal. You made my business personal. Bongino's voice cut through, still calm, but with steel underneath. Called me a grifter. Questioned my wealth. So let's discuss wealth, Congresswoman. Let's discuss the gap between your socialist rhetoric and your capitalist lifestyle. He was building a case now, piece by piece, the way he'd been trained. Designer clothes, photographed constantly. Professional styling. Your Tesla, how much did that cost? While you're pushing Green New Deal, that would eliminate oil jobs, you're driving a $70,000 electric car. The documents kept coming, each one a receipt, each one evidence. Book deals, speaking fees, media appearances. You're not a public servant anymore, Congresswoman. You're a brand. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, TM, the Instagram socialist. Making money off the image of fighting for workers while living like an influencer. A man stood in the gallery. Dominican 50s, wearing a small business owner's practical attire. Something in his expression suggested he'd been waiting years to speak. Bongino recognized the moment immediately. Sir, you have something to add. My name is Carlos Mendez. His voice carried the slight accent of first-generation immigrant combined with the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting just to survive. I owned a deli in Queens, Corona, 3 blocks from where Amazon HQ2 was supposed to be built. He pulled out documents of his own, business records, loan papers, evidence of a dream that had died. When I heard Amazon was coming, I saw opportunity. 25,000 employees. That's people who need lunch, coffee, breakfast. Real opportunity for small business. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from controlled anger that had been building for 3 years. I took out a loan, $50,000, expanded my deli, hired 2 more workers, got ready for Amazon employees, was going to cater to them, feed them, build my business. The room leaned in. This wasn't political theater. This was real pain. Then Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez killed the deal. Carlos's voice broke slightly. Said Amazon was bad for community. Said we didn't need them. Led protests. Made it political. He looked directly at AOC, and the hurt in his eyes was devastating. We needed those jobs, Congresswoman. I needed those customers. Now I'm in debt from expansion that didn't happen. Had to let workers go, people with families. Barely keeping business alive. His voice rose with working-class fury. While you do photo shoots and podcasts and Met Galas. While you become celebrity. While you build your brand. I'm struggling to survive because you decided you knew what was best for my community. Carlos sat down, and the silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of performative politics meeting actual consequences, of Instagram socialism meeting real working-class pain. Another person stood. Young black woman, early 30s, single mother's exhaustion visible in her posture. Ma'am, please. Bongino gestured for her to speak. My name is Keisha Williams. Her voice shook, but grew stronger with each word. I was going to work for Amazon. Had interview scheduled. Customer service position. $65,000 a year. She held up papers. Job posting. Interview confirmation. Dreams documented in email form. That job was going to change my life. I'm a single mom. Live with my mother in a one-bedroom. My son sleeps on the couch. That Amazon job, we could have gotten our own place. He could have had his own room. I could have breathed. Tears weren't quite falling, but were close. Then Amazon left because of Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. My interview canceled. That job went to someone in Virginia. My son still sleeping on a couch at his grandmother's house. She looked at AOC with the exhausted anger of someone who'd been betrayed. You talk about helping working people, about fighting for us. You killed my opportunity, my chance. For what? Your Twitter feed, your Instagram. Her final words came out like hammer blows. I work 2 jobs now, Congresswoman, making less than that one Amazon job would have paid, barely seeing my son, because you decided you knew better, from your luxury apartment, with your designer clothes. You don't represent us. You used us. Keisha sat down, and Dan Bongino let the testimony stand for itself. No commentary needed, no political spin, just 2 real workers from AOC's own district testifying that her performative politics had destroyed their actual lives. He gathered the photos, the documents, the evidence. You called me a grifter, Congresswoman, said I exploit workers. But I just heard from 2 people you represent, Carlos and Keisha, real workers from your district, and they're not saying I hurt them. They're saying you did. Bongino's voice carried the street-level directness of someone who'd grown up in the same neighborhoods these workers lived in. I built a business. I admit it. I'm successful. I'm proud of it. But I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I don't live in luxury while preaching about income inequality. I don't wear tax the rich to elite galas. I don't kill 25,000 jobs for people I claim to represent. He looked at her with the assessment of a cop who'd seen through fraud for decades. You're not a socialist, Congresswoman. Socialists actually believe their ideology. You're an opportunist. You found a market, young progressives who want to believe someone represents them. You built a brand on that belief, and you're making millions off it, while actual workers in your district struggle. The progressive side of the gallery was silent now, not because they agreed, but because they had nothing to say. Because Carlos and Keisha weren't conservative operatives. They were real constituents, real people hurt by real policies, and no amount of Twitter spin could make that go away. AOC tried to respond, stood shakily. These are complicated economic issues. Amazon had problems with 25,000 jobs. Bongino's voice cut through. That's not complicated. That's simple math. Jobs you killed, people you hurt, while you were becoming Instagram famous. She sat down hard, and for the first time in 3 years of performative politics, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had no comeback. Because the cop from Queens had presented evidence she couldn't spin away. Witnesses she couldn't dismiss. Truth she couldn't perform around. And he wasn't done. Not even close. Dan Bongino pulled out another folder thicker than the first. The simple action carried weight, more evidence, more receipts, more reality about to meet performance. Let's discuss your signature achievement, Congresswoman, the Green New Deal. Inside AOC's mind-warning bells were screaming now. The Green New Deal was supposed to be her triumph, her vision. the policy that defined her brand. But here, in a hearing room with actual workers testifying with a cop presenting facts, it was about to become something else. Your Green New Deal promises zero emissions in 10 years. Every building in America retrofitted. High-speed rail replacing planes. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? Bongino's voice carried the patient tone of someone explaining reality to someone who'd never lived in it. Estimated cost, according to even friendly analysts, $93 trillion. That's more than the entire GDP of the United States for 6 years. Where's that money coming from, Congresswoman? He didn't wait for an answer. But let's forget the impossible economics. Let's discuss what your Green New Deal would actually do to real workers. Documents emerged from the folder. Employment statistics, industry reports. The kind of boring data that meant everything to people whose livelihoods depended on them. Oil and gas industry, 10 million American workers. Your Green New Deal eliminates those jobs. Coal, hundreds of thousands more. Natural gas, gone. All those workers, people with families, mortgages, kids in school, you just expect them to. What? Learn to code. Movement in the gallery. A man in his 40s stood, work boots, calloused hands, the unmistakable bearing of someone who'd spent decades doing hard physical labor. Sir Bongino recognized working class when he saw it. My name is Mike Patterson. His voice carried the flat directness of Texas. I work on oil rigs, 25 years in energy. Started as a roughneck, worked my way up to supervisor. He pulled out a pay stub, the kind of evidence that couldn't be dismissed. I make $85,000 a year, no college degree, support my wife, 3 kids and a mortgage, was living the American dream. Mike's voice grew harder. Then policies like the Green New Deal started killing our industry. Companies scared to invest, jobs disappearing, projects canceled, all because people like Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez decided oil is bad. He looked at AOC with the exhausted anger of a working man facing someone who'd never done hard labor. I'm 45 years old, Congresswoman. What do I do if your Green New Deal kills my job? Learn to code solar panel installation pays half what I make now. How do I tell my wife we're losing the house? Tell my kids they can't go to college? Because you decided my job shouldn't exist. His voice cracked slightly with genuine fear. Your Green New Deal sounds nice for people with options. For elite who can afford electric cars and solar panels. For working people like me, it's a death sentence to everything we've built. Mike sat down, and the progressive vision of green jobs and environmental justice suddenly looked very different when confronted with a 45-year-old father of 3 facing economic destruction. Bongino let the testimony sink in. That's the problem with socialism, Congresswoman. It always sounds wonderful in theory. Free stuff save the planet. Help workers, but in practice. He gestured toward Mike. It destroys the actual workers you claim to help. He pulled out more documents. Amazon HQ2, you killed 25,000 jobs for your district. Green New Deal would kill millions more nationwide. Rent control you support makes housing shortages worse. Medicare for all eliminates private insurance. Millions of workers fought for. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Every policy that sounded good for Instagram hurt real people in reality. You know why socialism always fails. Bongino's voice carried the street-smart assessment of someone who'd grown up watching people struggle. Because it's run by people like you, who've never built anything, never risked anything, never had to make payroll or meet a budget, or live with the consequences of your ideas. His Queen's accent got thicker as the working-class fury came through. "I'm from Queens, Congresswoman. Same borough as you supposedly represent. But I actually worked there. Real job. Real struggle. Real bills. You tended bar for 2 years, then became a politician who performs working class on Instagram." He held up the Met Gala photo again. "This is who you really are. Not the working class champion, the elite pretending to be working class, the champagne socialist, the limousine liberal, making money off the image of caring while real workers suffer from your policies." AOC tried to respond, voice shaky now. "The Green New Deal would create jobs. Ask Mike how many jobs it creates when his oil rig closes." Bongino's interruption was surgical. "Ask Carlos about the Amazon jobs you killed. Ask Keisha about the opportunity you destroyed. These are real people, Congresswoman, not theory, not Instagram posts. Real workers whose lives your policies have hurt." A congressman from Texas leaned into his microphone. Conservative drawl, thick with contempt. "In Texas, we call someone who wears a $35,000 dress to criticize the rich a hypocrite. What do you call it in New York, Congresswoman?" The room erupted in applause from the conservative side. Progressive staffers were fleeing, now couldn't defend. This couldn't spin workers testifying against their champion, couldn't make Instagram socialism sound good when confronted with Mike's fear of losing his house. Bongino gathered his documents. "Every policy you push sounds good. Helps workers, saves planet, sticks it to the rich. But the reality," he gestured to Carlos, Keisha, and Mike. "Real people hurt. Real jobs killed. Real families struggling. Because you're more interested in performing caring than actually doing the work." He leaned forward, and his final assessment carried the weight of someone who'd spent 30 years serving, while she'd spent 3 years performing. "You're not helping workers, Congresswoman. You're using them for your brand, for your Instagram, for your celebrity. And when people like Carlos and Keisha and Mike suffer because of your policies, you just pose for another photo shoot." Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat at her desk, face pale, hands trembling slightly. The Instagram politician had just been confronted with Instagram's opposite reality. The performative progressive had just met actual working people she'd hurt. And the champagne socialist had no answer for the cop who'd presented the receipts. Because every luxury was documented, every hypocrisy was photographed, every policy failure had real victims sitting in the gallery. And no amount of Twitter spin or Instagram posts could make that disappear. Dan Bongino closed his folder, but he left it on the table, evidence, visible truth, undeniable fraud exposed. The hearing continued for another 20 minutes, but everyone knew it was over. The cop from Queens had systematically destroyed the socialist from Instagram, and 3 workers from her own district had stood as witnesses to her betrayal. The video went viral within hours. Not the clip AOC's staff had prepared, "AOC destroys Trump propagandist," but the actual testimony. Carlos's pain, Keisha's betrayed dreams, Mike's fear for his family, and Dan Bongino calmly, methodically presenting the receipts of AOC's hypocrisy. By evening, 50 million views. By midnight, memes everywhere. AOC at the Met Gala next to Carlos's shuttered deli. Her Tesla next to Mike's pay stub. Tax the rich dress next to Keisha's son sleeping on a couch. The visual contrast was devastating. Even mainstream media couldn't ignore it. CNN ran segments titled, "Questions about Ocasio-Cortez's Amazon decision." MSNBC struggled to defend the Met Gala. The photos were too iconic. The workers' testimony too real. The hypocrisy too obvious. AOC's response came via Instagram naturally. A 10-minute video explaining how she was being attacked by right-wing media, how the working class needed to stick together, how her policies really would help. But the comment section was brutal. Even her supporters were asking about Carlos, about Keisha, about those 25,000 Amazon jobs. In Queens, Carlos Mendez gave one interview to local news. Someone finally listened to us. Not as props, as real people she hurt. That's all we wanted to be heard. Keisha Williams was more direct. She took my opportunity and used it for her brand. Now someone finally called her out. Finally showed everyone what we've known. She doesn't represent us. She represents herself. Mike Patterson spoke for millions of energy workers. I've got 3 kids depending on me. And politicians like her want to eliminate my job for some green fantasy. It's nice to hear someone finally defend us working people. Actually defend us, not just perform it. The political consequences were immediate. A primary challenger emerged in AOC's district, not another progressive, but a moderate Democrat, with actual working-class roots. Real representation, not Instagram performance. The slogan was direct and devastating. By December 2025, polling in her district showed vulnerability for the first time. The Met Gala photo had always been problematic, but combined with real constituents testifying about harm, with a cop from Queens presenting evidence, with the contrast between her luxury lifestyle and her socialist rhetoric, the carefully constructed brand had cracks. Dan Bongino's podcast episode covering the hearing became his most downloaded ever, 20 million listens in a week. Not because of partisan cheerleading, because he'd defended actual workers against a politician who'd used them. Because he'd presented facts against performance. Because he'd exposed fraud with receipts. 3 months later, the moment was still being discussed. Political scientists analyzing how performative politics meets reality. Media experts discussing the gap between Instagram image and actual governance. Working-class voters asking why the politicians who claimed to represent them lived like elite. But perhaps the most important consequence was what Carlos, Keisha, and Mike represented. Real workers from AOC's district testifying that her policies had hurt them. Not conservative operatives, not Republican plants. Just Americans who'd been promised representation and received performance instead. The hearing had exposed something that no amount of Instagram posts could fix: the fundamental gap between champagne socialism and actual working-class life. Between the politician who attended the Met Gala and the constituents who couldn't afford rent. Between the brand that said, "Tax the rich," and the reality of designer clothes and luxury apartments. Dan Bongino had been called a grifter by someone whose entire political career was performance. And he'd responded not with insults, but with evidence. Not with rhetoric, but with receipts. Not with performance, but with reality. He'd presented the Met Gala photos she couldn't explain, the Amazon jobs she'd killed, the workers she'd hurt, the luxury lifestyle that contradicted her socialist brand. And he'd let her own constituents testify to the consequences of her policies. The Instagram socialist had met a cop who knew how to build a case. The performative progressive had faced actual working people she'd betrayed. The champagne socialist had been exposed by someone who'd actually lived working-class life instead of just performing it. And America had watched it all unfold in real time, documented in hearing testimony, viral video, and the faces of 3 workers whose dreams had been destroyed by policies that sounded good on Instagram but failed in reality. The lesson was simple: delivered by a cop from Queens to a politician from Instagram performance eventually meets reality. Brands eventually face facts. And fraud eventually gets exposed by someone with receipts. Dan Bongino had brought the receipts, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had no answer for them.